Okay, it's a privilege again to go into the rest of Psalms and to journey with our community through the book of Psalms. And has anybody read a psalm this past week? Yeah, a few. Okay, that's okay. We want to try and encourage that over the next couple of weeks, that our whole community, just even if you only read one psalm, that you will just get in the book of Psalms. And that you will just try and see some of the value that David and some of the other faithful followers of God wrote about their journey and their experience of faith, because they're so relatable. And as we saw last week, they're so real and so raw. And basically, they're just these poems or these songs or basically these journal notes of people who have gone before us, who have practiced faith, who have had up and down seasons in their life, and try to keep trusting in God. And so we're going to continue today on the series on Psalms. And if it's your first time here at Gracegate, we want to especially welcome you into our community. We have a few core values here, and one of the most important ones is that we value belonging. And so if you have come for the first time and you're just visiting, we hope that you will actually make Gracegate your home and you will find community and friendships in this space. And if you have just come back, well, welcome back, and I hope your week has been good. And are we ready to tackle another psalm today? All right. What I want to do today is a bit different, and basically I want to go through a psalm, and I want us to basically go through verse by verse. And I would love it that if all of you would stay tuned and follow in, and hopefully at the end of today's message, and as we've read through the whole psalm, that we will leave here with a psalm not only in our heads or knowledge of it, but actually it will move us. It will move us in a way that if we're struggling with some stuff today, or if we're finding faith hard, if we're feeling that God is maybe distant, this psalm might open up some solutions and actually help us with some breakthroughs through today. All right, so are we excited? Yes? Are you with me? All right, I know it's still early, but the weather's good, so today's good. And the theme that we're going to be focusing on today is waiting. All right, how many of you enjoy waiting? A few, okay. But waiting, just the word sometimes is something that resonates with us, and it has kind of negative connotations. But today, the psalm that we're going to look at, that David introduces us to, is the psalm that really, it's not a lecture about waiting, but it's really just a posture of waiting. He helps us unpack the art of waiting. How can we wait well? I mean, none of us like waiting, and most importantly, when it comes to waiting on God, it's even more difficult. But if we look through the Bible, we can see that over time, everyone who has followed God in some season, there's been a waiting season. Wondering, hey, when is God going to show up? When is he going to do what he said he was going to do? So today we're going to unpack that. And to give you a bit of context before we get to the psalm, the few psalms before this one in chapter 40 is where David is kind of struggling. And he's struggling because of a bit of a mess that he has ended up in, all right? It is his own doing. It is his own choices. And basically he's in this, I guess, this pit or this despair or the sin that he's really wrestling with and struggling with. And this is his psalm, and this is his journal, this is his prayer, this is his song, how he reaches out to God. And I think we're going to learn some key ways and some key postures on how we can actually wait well. So let's kick it off. Psalm chapter 40 and verse 1. This is David, and this is what he says. He says, hey, I waited patiently for the Lord to help me, and he turned to me and he heard my cry. Yeah, David, when he finds himself in a bit of a mess, when he finds himself in this pit of despair or struggle, the first thing that David does is what? Do you know what he does? What does he do? He cries out, all right? I waited patiently for the Lord to help me, and he turned to me and he heard my what? my cry, all right? So the very first thing that David does when he finds himself in a mess is he actually reaches out to God. I love this because I think this is where we struggle, and some of us struggle with this so much in our faith journey, is that when we find ourselves in a bit of a mess or in a bit of a pit, the last thing we do is cry out to God. We kind of feel like, especially if it was my own choices that led me into this mess, like I'm not good enough to cry out to God. I feel I can't actually connect with God because I actually have to clean myself up first and then I can approach God. But what David does here is he gives us a key aspect of what it looks like in a waiting season. And the first thing he does is he reaches out to God. And I see this as kind of a vulnerable risk that David takes. This vulnerable risk because he's not exactly sure, is God out there? Is God listening to me? Does God see the despair and the pain and the struggle that I'm in? Does God see how messy I am? So it's this vulnerable risk that he actually takes, and I think that's sometimes maybe why we don't approach God firstly in our waiting season, is because we have to be really vulnerable and open and cry out to God, and we're not even sure if he's out there, if he's listening, if he's for us, if we've messed up. Here, the psalmist helps us see that the first thing he does is he cries out, and then he shows us that he waited. He waited. Now, I don't like waiting. I don't know about you, but just waiting is not one of the best things that we get to do in life, right? If we think about some situations in life, you think about if you have to wait in line for your morning coffee, right? That's just, it's not good enough, right? We live in a culture that is so fast-paced and that everything is so spontaneous and on the cuff that to wait for anything is a bit of a chore, or it's uncomfortable, or it's unpleasant for us. How many of you, when you order your Uber Eats, just a few minutes, after you've ordered them, you're already checking and saying, hey, why is he taking a detour? What's going on? Yeah? Some of you? We don't like waiting. When I think about waiting, there's not happy connotations that really echo this word. And maybe that's the problem when we think about waiting, and especially waiting on God. Maybe it's traffic, right? We hate waiting in traffic. None of us are like, yeah, we're going away this long weekend and we can't wait to get stuck in traffic. No. What do? We leave earlier. We make sure that we can try and get to our destination, arrive, so that we don't have to wait, so that we don't have to be stuck. And David says that he waited. He waited. For me, the worst of all nowadays is going to the doctor, right? Nowadays, I can't even wait in the waiting room. They make me wait in the car. Can you relate? Have you experienced that now? That you have to wait in the waiting room, and even if you are on time, you know what's going to happen, right? They are always late for some reason, right? If you're a doctor, yeah, apologies for that, but that's just my experience, right? That we always have to wait. And when we think of that waiting, we associate with, hey, actually, they are disinterested in me, or they are preoccupied, and so that I am not that valuable. And so when we think about waiting on God, our view can be a bit distorted when we think of waiting. Is God valuing me? Does he see me? Is he interested with what I'm wrestling with? But then David takes it a whole nother level. And he uses this word, waited patiently. I don't know who you are, but if you can wait patiently, you are a hero, right? Waiting patiently. I think this is like a spiritual hero here, because what David is showing us here, that the posture that he is waiting is very different to the general association with waiting. And the way he is waiting, I think he's waiting with this anticipation. He's waiting with this posture like, I am so looking forward to what's going to happen next. He's waiting as if he's going on a vacation just around the corner, and he's counting down the days, and he's like, I just can't wait until this holiday, till this breakthrough. I just can't wait to arrive at my birthday. He's actually anticipating, he's waiting patiently. His emotions aren't going over the top. He's just like got such emotional intelligence in this season, and his posture is actually so good. And he says, hey, I waited patiently. There's two things that the psalmist helps us see here in this psalm. And the first two things are what we need to do when it comes to our faith and when it comes to a season of waiting. And the first one is what? We need to cry out. We need to cry out. And the second thing we need to do is we need to wait patiently. What David is showing us here, where it looks like it's actually a vulnerable risk that he is taking, crying out to God and asking for his help, it's actually a vulnerable trust, because he's waiting patiently with such confidence and assurance. And this is only in this psalm, because there's a whole lot of other psalms where David, it's going up and down his journey of faith. And I think that's why we can connect so well with David's story, with David's psalms. So let's have a look at what God does when we cry out and when we wait patiently. Straight away we see, I waited patiently for the Lord to help me, and guess what? He turned to me. He turned to me, that the God of the universe, all right, he turns towards me when I cry out. I have this picture that God is on his mobile, right? And he's checking his Twitter account or his Instagram followers. And all of a sudden, he hears this cry. And guess what he does? He doesn't do what I do all the time. He doesn't multitask and try and speak to the person and listen to them while he's still on Instagram. But he actually puts his phone down and he says, hey, I'm present. I've heard your cry. That's the picture I get, that when David is crying out, when he's crying out and reaching out for God in this waiting season, when he's anticipating a breakthrough or something that's going to actually help him out of his difficult situation, he sees God actually turn towards him and actually show him, hey, that you are valuable, that I am interested in your world. I am interested in what you're going through. And then not only does he turn towards him, but he says this, hey, he heard my cry. He heard my cry. And I love this because this shows us it doesn't take a lot to actually get God's attention, right? It doesn't take a lot for us to get God's attention, that we can reach out to him and he will turn to us and that he will hear us. That there isn't a list of things that we have to do to try and grab God's attention, or we have to beat ourselves up to try and grab God's attention. But in our mess, in our despair, we can reach out to God. He turns towards us and he hears our cry. I love this. If you don't know faith, and if you don't know who God is, and you don't know what Jesus is all about, today what I'm sharing is about actual faith and who God is, what he wants for our lives and how he sees us. This is what David is writing in his season of waiting. And then he goes on and he helps us see again who God is. He says, he lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud, out of the mire. He set my feet on solid ground, and he steadied me as I walked along. Here, David now, in his season of waiting, he's telling us what God is doing in his life, what God has done in his life. And he says, hey, not only did he turn towards me, not only was he listening to me, but now he actually lifted me out of the pit of despair. Do you see that? That God will actually rescue us from that pit of despair. Now, some of us may be stuck in some situations and you're like, Wes, I've been in this situation for so long and it doesn't seem like God is rescuing me. I've been crying out, I've been waiting patiently, and honestly today it still feels like God is distant and He hasn't actually come and broken through and helped me. And whatever your season may look like, there is still this assurance that God will rescue us. And especially in the context, that David is speaking about, his context of sin, he's saying, hey, God is my only true rescuer. He will rescue me. And sometimes we don't like the way that God might rescue us because we want it done our own way, or this is the way we think is going to be best for us. But David shares here, and he says this about God. He says, hey, He lifted me out of the pit. He lifted me out of the pit of despair. And then he goes on and he says, hey, not only does He turn to me, not only does He hear me, not only does He lift me out of this mud and this difficult situation that I find myself in, but He says, hey, He set my feet on solid ground. He set my feet on solid ground and He steadied me as I walked along. You see, God's hope is that He will not only rescue us from some of the most difficult situations we face in life, but that He will also set us on a solid foundation so that we don't make the same mistakes again, so that we don't have to go and struggle in the same season again, that He will actually set our feet on a solid ground. In other words, we can have a hope of who God is. And then he says this, and He steadied me as I walked along. In other words, what God is doing here is He's establishing our future. He's helping us actually see that, hey, your past or what you've done and your mess that you're struggling with, I can bring you out of that. And not only can I bring you out of that, I'm going to journey with you step by step along the way. I'm going to help you to learn how to walk again. I'm going to give you the stability that you actually need. And guess what? When you do that, I'm going to move you forward into your future so that you're no longer struggling with your past. I love this picture of who God is. That the only two things David did was he cried out, he was waiting patiently, that God hears him. He turns to him, He picks him out, He rescues him, He plants his feet on a solid foundation, and He gives him stability and walks with him into his future. The last thing David says that God does for him then is He has given me a new song to sing, a hymn of praise to our God. I love this, that what God does here is He replaces the soundtrack that we've been listening to all the time that has led us into this pit. He removes that soundtrack. He takes away that song and He says, hey, I want to give you a new song to sing. A new song. And the way I picture this is someone with these massive big headphones, just like not missing a beat, like walking down the street and they got all the moves and they just really feeling it because God has done something incredible in their world. And the way He does that is He changes our thinking. He changes our thoughts. He changes the lies that we're listening to, and He says, hey, no. I'm going to put a brand new song in your heart. And then He says that many will see what He has done and be amazed. They will put their trust in the Lord. It's so incredible that David, the psalmist, speaking about this waiting season, is showing us what God is actually doing in this season, in the waiting. And then he goes on and he shares this. He says, oh, the joys of those who trust the Lord. He says, oh, the joys of those who trust the Lord. Oh, the joys of those who actually trust in God, who cry out to God in that season of waiting. He says, man, they're going to experience joy. They're going to experience blessing. He says, who have no confidence in the proud or in those who worship idols. I think what the psalmist is saying here is that in our season of waiting, it's so easy for us to get distracted. It's so easy for us to worship other idols, to think that these other things will actually bring us true satisfaction and contentment, to go along with the crowd because we think, hey, they've got it all together. But the psalmist is saying, yeah, hey, those who actually trust in the Lord, they will discover that true joy, that contentment that only God can bring. And he says, hey, don't be deceived. Don't be deceived by the enemy, because I think that's what the enemy's tactic is, especially in the waiting season when we feel like God is distant. It's his tactic to come and bring and to kind of morph and package some things that look so attractive and look so good that they will satisfy. And we know that they will just lead us back into that same pit of despair. David then goes on and he amplifies who God is. Listen to this, what he's saying here. He says, "O Lord my God, you have performed many wonders for us. Your plans for us are too numerous to list." Like, God's plans for you are too numerous to list. Like, there's so many. He's got incredible plans for your life. No matter what you've done, no matter what you've done, he's got incredible plans for your life and wants to bring transformation into your life. David says that you can't even list all of them. And he says here, you have no equal. No one compares to you, God, and what you can do in my life. Like, I've been in this waiting season and I've tried everything. I've looked to people, I've turned to every program, I've done whatever I can to try and fix this waiting season. But yeah, David is saying, hey, but there is a God who doesn't compare to anything else. You have no equal. He says, if I try to recite all your wonderful deeds, I would never come to the end of them. Like, God, you are good. Do you see why David in the beginning is waiting patiently with anticipation? Do you see? Because he is trusting in a God who is so much bigger than anything he could even imagine. He goes on in the psalm and he says, you take no delight in sacrifices or offerings, and now that you have made me listen, I finally understand you don't require burnt offerings or sin offerings. What David is saying here is, hey, you're not into the whole religious thing. You're not into just playing the part or putting on a performance. He says, no, you're all about delighting in relationship. I mean, that's at the heart of God, that he would have unique relationship with each and every one of us. And that's what he's saying here. And I love this, how he says here, now that you have made me listen. And I thought about that. I thought, is our waiting season sometimes a time where God just wants us to stop and pay attention and just open our ears and turn to him and listen? Is it a season where he's saying, stop the performance, stop, just doing everything thinking that this is going to make a difference, because all I really want is your heart. That's all I want. He goes on and he says this, then I said, look, I have come, as it is written about me in the scriptures. I take joy in doing your will, my God, for your instructions are written on my heart. Eugene Peterson phrases it a whole different way. What he's saying is, he says, okay, basically what David's saying is, I get it. I get it, God. You're inviting me to a party. You know what? And I'm accepting that invitation that you are throwing for me. And he says, and you know why? Because I want you to actually just come and transform me from the inside out. He says it's all about the heart. It's about the heart. And help me to let go of all the tradition, all the religious practices, all the sacrifices that actually don't mean anything to you, because what you really want is my heart. You want obedience. You want trust. And so, yeah, God, I'm opening up my heart to you. I love how David is going through this waiting season and helping us see this posture of waiting. Are you still all with me? Some, all right? He goes on and he says this, I have told all your people about your justice. I have not been afraid to speak out, as you, O Lord, well know. And I love these parts that David's expressing here, is because he's showing us that even in his waiting season, even when things have been difficult, guess what he still has been doing? He still has been holding on to God and echoing and telling people, hey, keep trusting in God. Hey, God is for you. Hey, don't abandon him. Honestly, he's got a plan for your life. He was still witnessing for God. He goes on and he says, just repeats it basically. He says, I have not kept the good news of your justice hidden in my heart. I have talked about your faithfulness and saving power. I have told everyone in the great assembly of your unfailing love and faithfulness. In other words, David has been a gladiator of the faith. He's been going out and telling people, hey, keep trusting in God's faithfulness. He will be there for you. He will make a difference in your life. He then goes on and he says, Lord, don't hold back your tender mercies from me. Let your unfailing love and your faithfulness always protect me. You know, one thing that we can kind of guarantee is that people will let us down. There'll be times in our life, there'll be seasons in our life where people will let us down. We'll be hurt. We'll get hurt. And what David is saying here is saying, hey, God, help me to place my trust in you. Help me to place my trust in your unfailing love. In other words, no matter what I do, no matter how far I go off track, that you will still be there for me, that your unfailing love is always there for me. When I don't feel worthy, when I feel that I've maybe been backstabbed, God, help me to remember that you are there for me. Your loving kindness, your faithfulness will always be there for me. And then he goes on and he says, hey, for troubles surround me. And he goes now back to kind of his stuff. I love this. He's been declaring who God is all the way through. He's been saying, hey, this is who's going to help me through this waiting season. And now he comes back to his stuff, his junk, his mess. He says, hey, for troubles surround me, too many to count. My sins pile up so high, I can't see my way out. They outnumber the hairs on my head. And he says, I have lost all courage. For some of us, maybe today, we're at this place. We're at this place where, we're just surrounded by our sin, by our stuff, by things that are happening in our world. And we don't see a way out, and we've actually lost all courage. And it's at this part of the psalm that David will try and help us to, hey, let me point you to the right direction. Let me help you to focus on who's your solution, who can be your breakthrough. And he says this then. He says, please, Lord, rescue me. Come quickly, Lord, and help me. And he says, may those who try, and this is crazy then. So he pleads this prayer, asking God for his help. He says he's lost all courage. He's saying, God, help me in my pit. And then he does this. He says, may those who try to destroy me be humiliated and put to shame. May those who take delight in my trouble be turned back in disgrace. Isn't that so human? Isn't that so human that we can pray a prayer to God and we can say, God, I really need your help. I need you to help me in my situation, but also hate our enemy. But also hope for the worst to happen to someone we dislike. Or internally celebrate when that person is failing. This is David's story. This is what he's writing at this time. And that's why I think we can connect with this so well. And then he goes on and he says not only that, he says, let them be horrified by their shame. For they said, aha, we've got him now. He's pleading with God. He's saying, hey, God, humiliate anyone, my enemies who've tried to destroy me, like take them out. Isn't this so ambiguous, what he's doing here? But it seems like he comes to his senses. And then he says this prayer. He says, hey, but may all who search for you be filled with joy and gladness in you. May those who love your salvation repeatedly shout, the Lord is great. David prays this prayer, saying, hey, may whoever search for you find you. May whoever search for you find that joy and contentment. And then he ends the psalm off with this saying, and I think this is probably one of the most important sayings that we find in the Bible. And this is what he says. He says, as for me, since I am poor and needy, let the Lord keep me in his thoughts. I know about you, but what David is doing here, again, is he's just showing his humanity. He's showing who he is. He's helping us to realize who we are. What he's doing in this psalm is he's actually taking us right back to the beginning. Right back to Psalm 40 verse 1. As he says, since I am poor and needy, he says, hey God, I need you. I can't do this on my own. And by doing that, he's going right back to the beginning where he's crying out to God again. You see, that's kind of the art of waiting. That's this posture of waiting that David is speaking about today. Today, I don't know what battle or season or struggle or relationship breakdown you might be facing, but I want you to know that although you may be poor and needy, although you might not see light at the end of the tunnel, there is a God who still does the impossible. There is a God who still can do breakthroughs through our life. And my hope is that you would have that posture of patiently waiting, anticipating for God to turn to you, to hear you, to pull you out of that pit, to give you stability, and to help you to move forward, to journey with you forward. And not only allow you to struggle along, no, he'll put a new beat in your ears so that you can dance forward in life and see how good he is to us. The God we're speaking about today is alive. We believe it. We believe it because we've seen him send his son Jesus to come and pay the price for our sins so that we can have this hope and this assurance, so that we can wait patiently with anticipation that if we're still alive, the story isn't over. There is always hope. And I love this about the Psalms because David is as real and as raw as he can be. As he's praying the prayer of God, help me, he's still on the one end praying the prayer, oh God, tear them down. It just shows the true humanity of who David is. But most importantly, he ends off with this saying, hey, God, since I am poor and needy. In other words, my posture again, God, is that I need to cry out to you. This morning we're going to end, and if we actually just go to the last verse, it says here, you are my helper and my savior. Oh my God, do not delay. I don't know, maybe if you have been delaying to actually cry out to God because you feel you're not good enough, you feel you don't measure up, you feel you keep making the same mistakes over and over again, and like that there's no way forward. If that's you today, I want to encourage you to cry out to God and to say, hey God, I'm here. I'm waiting patiently. Just show up. Show up. Show me what you can do if I cry out to you. As we sing this last song, it's a song that we want to declare about who Jesus is in our lives and what he can do for us. And I'm going to encourage you, if you have never cried out to God, I want to encourage you to do that today by just echoing these lyrics that we sing. Just make it your prayer. Say, hey God, this is my prayer. I'm crying out these lyrics today. And I'm crying out these lyrics because you know what's going on in my waiting season. And today, I am patiently waiting with anticipation and trusting in you, God, that you can do something in my situation. God, so today, we trust you more than any other thing in our life, God. People have let us down. Addictions have let us down. Lust has let us down. Things that we thought will satisfy and bring us so much joy and contentment and fulfillment has really just destroyed us, God, and it's led us back to this pit. And so today, we're crying out to you, God, a God who is for us, a God who loves us, a God who, if we would just cry out, turns toward us. And he hears us, and we're crying out to you today, God, and we're saying, hey, step into that waiting space that we're in and show us that you are still a God who is faithful, that your unfailing love will never fail us, God. We're trusting in you today. In Jesus' name.